My guest tonight is the co-host of Showtime's The Circus, contributor to the CBS News and The Atlantic, and an author of the new book, Futureface, a family mystery and epic quest and the secret to belonging. Please welcome Alex Wagner. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, my friend.
Doing so many things and finally writing your book, Futureface. This is one of those stories where I felt like I was biased because I connected with it a lot as a mixed race person.
Yeah.
There's always an interesting story that you tell yourself about your history.
Yep.
There's always an interesting story in discovering where you come from. Futureface is really about that, but where do you get the title from?
In 1993, when I was very, very young, there was a Time magazine cover heralding the new face of America. And
Right.
It was this composite image of all the different races that would be dominant in the years hence. And it kind of looked like me. So I said to myself, I'm Futureface. I am the face of America. I am an avatar of the future brought to the present
Right.
to show you Americans what your future will look like.
I feel like a lot of people have said that and thought that they go like, in the future, you know, we're all gonna look like this. And then Trump came and he was like, nah.
Pause.
Yeah, just pause on that.
Yeah.
But that idea is something that has stretched from that time. People go like, this is what it's gonna be. But what a lot of people don't realize is these mixed identities come with so many stories attached to them. You trace your family history in this book, and it takes you down like a really scary path. What is your mix, and what do you discover?
So my mom is an immigrant from Rangoon, Burma, and my dad was born in a tiny town in northeast Iowa called Lansing.
Right.
And they had I had this idea about who I was, but really my identity was more about Garfield and Chips Ahoy and Sebago boat shoes than it was about any particular axis of my identity. And that was nice, I think, but that wasn't real. You know, there was not a lot to hold on to. And at a certain point, I began to feel the weightlessness of that. And I wanted to know more about who I was and where my community was, which is, I think, something a lot of mixed race kids want to know and a lot of Americans want to know, especially right now. And I began to unwind these family stories and realize what my family had been telling itself about where we'd come from was filled with obfuscations and half-truths and, in some cases, lies.
Right.
And that we'd been covering up some pretty ugly parts of our own histories. So this is my attempt at finding the ugly parts, putting some sunlight on them, but also coming to a place about, like, what does it mean to be an American today, and what sacrifices are made along the way. When
you were researching your history, you discover this information about your family. As everyone sort of knows the story of Burma.
Yeah.
And people go like, oh, Burma is the darling, and Burma, these are the people who were oppressed. And then you discover another side of your own people's history. It must be difficult to accept that there's a piece of the story that isn't as romantic as you would like it to be, though.
Not even just not romantic, but bad.
Right.
I mean, I think especially for brown people, right? There's this idea that brown immigrants come to America and immediately become the sort of virtuous newcomers, and that all the bad things about America exist in the present day, and that there weren't bad things that happened back home. And what I realized is a lot of the sort of tribalism and nationalism that plague modern day American politics were a huge part of Burma's past, and we're seeing the sort of harvest of that right now with the genocide of the Rohingya Muslim minority in Burma.
Right.
And what I realized is that, you know, my people in Burma could have been the ones wearing the, like, Make Burma Great Again trucker hats. and that's not something you think of as a person that is half brown, right? That the brown side might have been just as sort of ethnically nationalist as the white side.
It is a difficult thing to interrogate, and it's a story that seems to repeat itself in America, because you have many Americans struggling with the narrative of their past because it feels like they're being indicted for what their forefathers did. So you see it with the monuments, you see it with the South and the argument about the Confederate flag. People go, no, it was only about the good. Do you think that in many ways Americans like to romanticize or lie to themselves about the true story of their origins?
Yes. I mean, it's called the white immigrant origin story, and it is a lie. I mean, that...
In what way?
Well, my dad had this story. My dad was an avowed Democrat, progressive liberal, right? But they had this idea that we just came to Iowa and we harvested God's bounty and how great that was. But actually, when you dig into it, there's a reason there weren't people of color in the town that my dad grew up in, because they had either kicked all of them off the land or didn't allow them up from the South to claim the land when it was open to everybody else.
Right.
But those stories about American history rarely dovetail with our own personal histories. And that's what this book is about. It's about taking the sort of American narrative and refashioning it with some truth.
Right. It's a fascinating journey that you go on, discovering about yourself, about your family, and I feel like that's served you well, because you do everything everywhere. I mean, I know you from CBS. We know you from writing at The Atlantic. You're now working on the circus.
I am, and it's a circus.
Your most recent trip you took was to Russia. Like, when everyone was like, oh, it's about to be a war, you're like, yeah, I'm going there.
Yeah. Well, when people are like, everyone's leaving, I'm like, I'm coming. We went to Moscow, and we basically went through the looking glass. Like, we saw the Russian propaganda apparatus at its heart.
Right.
Spoke with the Kremlin foreign ministry spokespeople, the head of RT, Russians on the street. It is a parallel universe over there. And
in what way?
The denial of basic facts, which is something we can understand here in America, coming from a different place, and also the sort of resoluteness that the truth that is being sort of sent out on Russian airwaves is the only truth.
And when you speak to these people about that, when you speak to young Russians who you would think are connected and worldly, they believe this information wholeheartedly.
What's happening to young Russians is something different. I think there's an older generation that doesn't sort of believe in America and still harbors a lot of the same Cold War animosity.
Right.
The younger generation is much more apathetic. They've been taught that everything's corrupted. America's elections are corrupted, Russia's elections are corrupted. American media is corrupted, Russian media is corrupted. And so there's this really dark apathy that's set in that is really disheartening.
When you speak to them, is there a fear that that kind of attitude could come through to America?
I mean, sure, if we don't have more Trevor Noahs in the world.
Oh, shucks.
Like,
oh,
keeping us woke.
Oh,
it's true.
shucks.
No, but actually, I think humor and analysis is also what keeps us alive in a way.
Right.
And I didn't see a lot of that over there. Now, we didn't spend an infinite amount of time over there, but I mean, I think satire and conversation and dialogue, I mean, this is what keeps our democracy alive. And that's the thing that I sort of lean on in the dark times, the end of days that we seem to be fast approaching.
Right. I like how you said that, so it's the dark days.
Just the dark, this is the end of days.
Fast approaching.
No big deal. But we're still alive. We still got a heartbeat.
We're still alive. We've still got a heartbeat. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Friend.
This is a fascinating book. Futureface will be available April 17th. You can pre-order it now. The circus airs Sundays at 8 p.m. on Showtime. Alex Wagner, everybody.